So, from that, let's go ahead and move on to the ravine. Now, the ravine story is one of those things, as I was researching it, I was like, And I do that a lot, but then when I get to the end of it, I'm like, and I type up all my notes, and I'm like, okay, I kind of know what approach I'm taking with this. But let's start off. I will take you down the same path that I traveled. The year 1970s. Very, very vague thing. So right here you think, this is most likely fake. But 1970s. I found this article about this event that supposedly took place in the 1970s. In South America, I believe. There was a college professor, an unnamed college professor. We've done enough episodes where we, again, know where this story's going. The year is, there's no specific year, there's no specific name. We do know that this college professor taught at a college called the University of the Andes. He walks out of his office one day after school, talks to a couple of his colleagues, talks to a couple of students. He's walking out to the parking lot. Generally just a liked guy. People know who he is. They don't say his name, but we'll assume he was very popular. And once this unnamed college professor gets to his car, someone says his name, he turns to him, he waves goodbye to him, gets into the car, and then no one ever saw him again. The car was still in the parking lot. The last anyone saw was him getting in the car. They never saw the car drive away. He's been missing for 40 years. Now, that supposedly was written up in the El Tiempo, which is Venezuela's largest newspaper. It was supposedly written up by a journalist known as Sugunda Peña. You'll see article after article referring to this very vague event, and they'll say, here's the article, and you click on it, it says page not found. So, it's possible the story never existed. It started as an internet legend, and they just linked it to a page that never was there. It's possible that the story was published by that newspaper at some point, but I see that from time to time where older articles are no longer found on that website, but they did exist at one point because I have them cached somewhere else. Or it could be that it was in the newspaper and then they realized that this story is ridiculous and then they removed it from their website. All three of those are possible. But I can't get any more information on that. And there's just nothing specific about it. So who knows whether or not it's true in any way, shape, or form. But as I kept researching that, I found this story. This is the story of the girl of the pears, or the pear girl. And pear as in like a fruit that you eat, not as like two of kind. Let's hop in the Dead Rabbit dirigible, because we're going to leave Venezuela. We got to cross the Atlantic. We're going to Spain. Specifically, we're going to the island of Tenerife. Tenerife, it's the largest island in the Canary Islands. So we float over there on the Dead Rabbit dirigible. We're going back in time to the year 1910, and we're in the year 1910, and there's a young girl there, not named. So again, a little suspicious. Again, some people place this story not in 1910, but 1905. So as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, it's still fairly vague. We have a girl who's not named. There's a 5-year difference between when the story may have taken place. And for the most part, it is considered a legend in the area. This young girl is just chilling at her house. And they're all eating lunch. And the mom says, honey, will you go, we'll just call her Honey. Honey, will you go to the pear farm? The pear orchard, I guess is the right word. Your dad wants pears for dessert. And she's like, yes, Mama, I will go get pears. That'll be a fun adventure. I'll go get my friends. And the mom's like, yeah, your friends. Because she knows she doesn't have any friends. She's kind of a loser. So Honey goes out into the village and tries to round up some friends. Says, hey, do you guys want to go pick pears for my dad? Woohoo! I imagine like you just don't need a pear for dessert. I figure if that, you would just have pears on the dinner table. They probably like covered them in honey or sugar or something like that. But anyways, so she's like, hey, do you guys want to go into the orchard with me to go get pears? And her friends, she actually did have friends. Her mom just doesn't think very highly of her. Her friends go, oh, no way, dude, because we know where that pear orchard is. Now, this pear orchard was owned by the Honey's family. And it was in a place called Barranco de Chamoco. And that area is littered with caves. And going far, far back, the people living there believe that the caves are inhabited by spirits. It's not a place you want to go. It's definitely not a place you want to go as a child. The whole place is just generally spooky. It's basically Elm Street, but a ravine full of caves, and people disappear. So she can't get any of her friends to go with her. she goes, well, I got to go get the pears. Like, I have to go. So she goes off into the ravine and she starts picking pears. And when she's in the ravine, she starts to feel just the heat of the sun on her. She's like, oh my God, it's so hot. I wish my dad didn't eat pears. Wish my dad was allergic to pears and I can give him one and he'd just swell up and die. I hate my dad so much. I hate him so much. But as she's having these horrible thoughts, just the sun's beating down on her. And she begins to notice a very cool mist in the area. And she's thinking, that's not normal. And she's watching this mist kind of roll through the ravine. And it's enveloping her skin, and she just immediately feels a cool relief from the hot, hot sun. She's almost lost in the mist at this point. And that's when a tall figure, dressed in all white, appears out of the mist and leads her down what she described as an impossibly long corridor. And she goes, at first I was scared, obviously, because this is something completely out of the ordinary. But I felt compelled to keep walking. And the creature, or the person, or whatever it was, kept making hand signals. That's the only way it could communicate with Honey, was by making hand signals to her of where to go, how to follow her. And that was the only way the creature could communicate with Honey. So they walk all the way down this passage, and eventually she said it opened up into a beautiful orchard. Like they were on this little precipice, and she looked down and she saw this orchard going as far as the eye could see. She said every type of fruit, every type of tree you can imagine was there. And the valley was littered with people just like the stranger who led her down the cave. She said it looked like a watercolor painting in motion. She's the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She immediately felt this just sense of peace and joy come over her. Now, when I'm reading this, I'm thinking at this point, what she inhaled was most likely some sort of noxious or toxic gas, and she had a near-death experience. We have the tunnel of light. We have the being overcome with a sense of joy and wonder. We have a guardian angel type figure. And I'm like, okay, she walked out there, the earth farted, she started to pass out because of some sort of carbon dioxide overdose, and then she woke up. But as I'm continuing to read the story, she's in the cave, and eventually her guide, the tall being, began to motion her away and motioned her back down with his hand, saying, hey, come here, you can do it. Oh, good girl. Motioning her, that's the only way they could communicate, back down the corridor. And then she finds herself back in the pear orchard. But the first thing she notices, the cool mist is gone, and it is 10, 15 degrees hotter than when she left. And she's thinking, there is no way it could be this hot all of a sudden. She's getting scared again, because now she's back in our world, and she's experiencing something that she shouldn't experience. So she gets the pears, because she still has to do her job, and she's just figuring, tell them about the monster people in the valley and all that stuff. It'll be a cool story while we're eating pears. She makes her way out of the ravine, and she notices a road that wasn't there when she went into the ravine. She's like, uh-oh. Okay. And as she's walking down the road, she begins to see cars driving on the road, which she described as futuristic-looking cars. But she is finally able to make her way home. And there her mother, her now middle-aged mother, greets her. It's the year 1940. 30 years passed while she was in the ravine. And the mother calls out and says, it's my girl. Her name became, or the story is, La Niña de las Peras, or the Pear Girl is how it's kind of known. So it's a local legend in that area about this girl who went looking for pears in this ravine that everyone knows is haunted and then came back 30 years later. So, interesting story. Possible proof of a time slip. Most likely a local legend of a spooky place. And again, a lot of these legends have a core moral value. This one would be, kids, don't go there alone. If you go there alone, something bad may happen. Stay out of there. That's how these urban legends are created. But as I'm reading that article, I go, this sounds familiar. This sounds really familiar. When I watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it's funny because my favorite character on that show was Giles. Loved that. Loved that character. I always loved the idea of researching books and having 5 books out on the table and going through it and trying to solve this mystery. He was always my favorite character. I always felt he was the most relatable one, because that's kind of the way that I approached stuff. Not like I ever fought demons. Well, actually I did. But the point is that I always liked that ideal and even that visual aesthetic, whatever, that thing that you look at and you go, I like that. So I'm reading this article in the coffee shop. It was getting ready to just be another weird disappearing thing I was going to do about the guy in the car and then go, oh, here's a local legend I found too. But as I'm reading it, I said, I've heard this story. And not only have I heard it almost 2,000 miles away. We're going to Moscow. So outside of Moscow, there is a place known as Golosov Ravine. In the year 1621, a detachment of Tatar horsemen, we've covered them before in the Great Mud Flood thing, the empire that's pretty much been erased from the history books. In 1621, a detachment of Tatar horsemen show up at the Tsar's palace and are immediately taken prisoner because they shouldn't be there at all. And when they're being questioned, they go, what are you doing here? Why did a bunch of cavalrymen show up here in the middle of the day? And they go, we have some questions. Yes, to be fair, we did try invading you guys, but something's wrong. Something's off. And as they're basically being questioned by the Russian forces, because the Tatar Empire and the Russians didn't like each other. I guess if you didn't listen to that episode, they hated each other, actually. But anyways, as the Russians are trying to figure out why these guys just showed up in the middle of nowhere, they start to notice something. One, they appeared out of the middle of nowhere, but two, their armor was old, and not like old and rusted and busted and stuff like that. It was an old style armor. It was an armor that the Tatar Empire had not used since 1570, 50 years earlier. And what the Tatar soldiers were saying was, listen, when we were there at the Battle of Moscow, you guys started whooping our butt. You guys are far more better prepared than we gave you credit for. So us group of guys, took off. And we hid, and the investigators let me guess, you hid in Golosov Ravine. Tatar soldiers like, yeah, how'd you know? And the Russians go, that place is haunted. It's not a place that we go. It's just this weird place. There's been a lot of disappearances and stuff like that there. And this may be the cause of why. And the Tatar soldiers said, yes, we hid in the ravine, and a mist rolled through the ravine. The next thing we knew, we came out of the ravine. We noticed things weren't right. None of our other soldiers were here. Couldn't get a hold of anybody. Lost and with nothing else to do, we came back to Moscow thinking, hey, maybe we won the battle. Or maybe we could just get some answers. But that's not it. That's not what I was reminded of when I read the story of the Pear Girl. Golosov Ravine, 1832. Two local peasants get drunk. They're having a good time, just hanging out, just chilling, throwing their arms around each other, tickling each other. And these two peasants say, you know what? Let's take a shortcut home through Golosov Ravine. I'm like, okay, why'd you pronounce it differently that time than you did every other time? And he's like, I don't know, I'm drunk. So these two peasants go into the ravine. A mist rolls through. They come out of the ravine. 20 years had passed. When they get home, their wives don't recognize them. But they had a bit of a different twist on their story. They said, when the two peasants said, when we went into the ravine, the mist rolled through, and a giant corridor appeared out of nowhere. Out of that corridor, a tall, hairy person walked and communicated with us only using their hands and led us back out of the corridor. The Tatar story and the two peasant story supposedly were both investigated by the government. The Tatar story was apparently it was an official report was filed with the Russian government over why these soldiers showed up out of nowhere. And again, reportedly, the peasant story was an official police transcript, and when the police went out to the ravine to investigate whether or not their story was true, one of the officers disappeared. Those particular details I can't verify. I found articles talking about it, but I couldn't find actually a police report from 1832. Those may or may not exist. What I find fascinating is these two stories, one in Golosov Ravine and one in the Canary Islands, separated by decades and thousands of miles, have similarities. Now, normally, if the story is completely made up, they will say this is similar to what happened at Golosov Ravine. Or Golosov Ravine story, if they took the idea from the Pear Girl, they'll say, there's precedence for this. Something else like this happened in the Canary Islands. As far as I can tell, these two stories have never, ever been connected. In all of my research, I have never found one referencing the other. The resources on Golosov Ravine are almost all in Russian. There's like a short Wikipedia article and a couple articles in English, and all of the sourced material is in Russian. I had to do translation stuff. The Canary story, again, I had to go to websites and translate from Spanish. These two stories, as far as I can tell, have never been connected. And they both, even if certain details are wrong, like the 1905 to the 1910, the details of a ravine full of mist, a long tunnel, a tall person, one of them they're hairy and one of them they're just tall. They don't say how much hair they have. They could be like a smooth otter body, could be a full-on bear. We don't know. But you have the ravine, you have the mist, you have the tunnel, you have something tall, only communicating with their hands, and most importantly of all, time jumps. Totally blew my mind when I was reading it, and I thought, this sounds familiar. And I remember when I was pulling back up my Golosov Ravine, which I was going to do as a separate story, just a small story. As I was pulling that up, I said, I know it has to do with mist and ravine, but I'm pretty sure they also said something about only using their hands to communicate. And I pulled it up, and that was the case. This makes me think that this is very, very real. This makes me think that this not only has happened, but more interesting enough, can happen again. But what's weird is you wouldn't have proof of it for decades. Is there a limit to how long you're in that tunnel? To how long it takes for you to get out? Even if some sort of parapsychologist wanted to replicate this, he's going to be like, okay, see you in 60 years. Is there any way to test something like that? I honestly think, I could be wrong on this, but I honestly think that this is the first time those two events have been connected. And if that's the case, this stuff has not been researched at all. Because generally, the one in the Canary Islands is considered a local legend. It would basically be like if a scientist wanted to investigate whether or not there were real witches in Salem. You'd be like, of course they're not. We have all of it was just a legend people made up to, persecute single women and stuff like that. I think these ravines are real. I think the mist can send you forward in time. I think this story gets added to the list of conspiracies or things I believe in. Because either someone made up these stories decades ago and never connected them and just thought it'd be funny if someday someone stumbled across both of them, or in two parts of the world, in two similar circumstances, people traveled into the future in the same way. If this is true, it's groundbreaking. If you can warp time like that on Earth, if we have a natural time machine that shoots people forward in time, do you understand? Really, that would change so much. But are they real? We'd have to test them. And then wait, and wait, and wait for the answer, or we just step into the mists ourselves. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.